political animals.
Hello everyone and welcome to Political Animals, the news and opinion segment of the Commoners podcast. My name is Adam. This week John will be sharing with us his thoughts on the perceived hypocrisy within the US political system. And I can guarantee you, John, that it's not just the US that suffers from a plague of hypocrisy. No, annoyingly, it seems to be at the root of all power plays in general. I'll point you to the continued refusal for a particular referendum here in Scotland after an eerily similar referendum in the UK. But I digress, so here is the news from Europe. Now, of course, the main headline this week is the attack on Westminster, which unfolded on Wednesday afternoon. After running over people with a car on Westminster Bridge, an attacker broke through a security checkpoint at the main entrance of the Parliament grounds and stabbed the police officer in the main courtyard. Unfortunately, that police officer, PC Keith Palmer, along with a college worker Aisha Frady, US tourist Kurt Cochran and an as of yet unnamed pensioner have all sadly died. The attacker, who was also killed at the scene, was identified as Khalid Massoud. He was a 52-year-old British man from the most exotic land of Kent, the county southeast of the London metropolis. He was British born and in the past had been on the radar of MI5, the British Domestic Intelligence Agency, for links to extremist violence, but he was a closed case and not under investigation at the time of the attack. The Islamic State has claimed responsibility and 8 have since been arrested in raids across the country. More news will surely follow as the investigation continues. The Westminster Parliament paid their respects with a moment of silence, and the Holyrood Parliament delayed their debate on the new independence referendum. Faith leaders from across the religious spectrum stood together in solidarity, meeting together at Scotland Yard, and flowers and thank you notes have been given to police officers throughout London. The Met has also retired PC Keith Palmer's shoulder number, and the Met Police Federation have established a memorial fund to be given to PC Palmer's family. They've raised over £150,000 so far, but if you're keen on giving to the fund yourself, you can find the link on the Met Police Federation Twitter page at MPFed. We've also retweeted a link on our own page at Commoners Pod if that's easier. Sadly, events like this produce opportunities for those daring enough to score political points on the back of tragedies, and today was no different. The official Leave EU campaign, which, yes, still exists, released an image of a pro-Islam march with the text, "British born means nothing if he lived in a segregated community and hated the British way of life. Not at all British." Now, to agree with this sentiment in the short term is understandable. We've witnessed real harm done to real people in our country by someone we trusted, so it's tempting to say he is not one of us. But the underlying idea is more pernicious. It means that those in the fringes are to be avoided, that those who are targeted for their looks and creed should be shut out until they become one of us. It means that those who are downtrodden are in such a place because they deserve it, they've shut themselves out. It again gets to the nature of identity and who gets to define it. Taken at face value, this quote by the Leave campaign could leave many British-born people on the second tier of civil life. Segregated communities are an issue in the UK, as they are in other areas of Europe, but I wonder what value segregation would have in the face of acceptance and compassion instead of fear and ignorance. So who gets to define Britishness? Is it white, Christian, Anglo-Saxon? For me, British means taking responsibility to ensure that those in the fringes are not forgotten, that those feeling targeted for their looks and creeds are welcomed and shown compassion and kindness, and that those who are downtrodden are given a hand up. Admittedly though, this is an ideal and it's not the trend that I've been observing. Changing tracks now to head to the opposite side of the European Union, from the northwest corner to the southeast, Bulgaria. Now, we do need to apologise to our obviously innumerable Bulgarian listeners, Sajali vam, for not having a Bulgarian election special, because this Sunday is election day in Bulgaria. Bulgaria is one of the more recent entrants into the European Union and is one of its poorest, only being beaten to the wooden spoon by Romania. Nevertheless, it has reasonably secure freedom of speech and civil liberties, this of course overlooking the plight of the Roma population, who are social outcasts and segregated from society at large. It also has a rapidly developing economy and is one of the most consistently growing economies of the EU over the past few years. Bulgaria has a semi-presidential system in which the elected president is head of state and commander-in-chief of the military, and not much else. His primary role is to promote Bulgaria abroad, and at home keep a check, albeit a rather weak check, on the legislature. The president has a soft veto on legislation, which can be overturned by an absolute majority in the legislature. But we're not too concerned about him at the moment. Instead, we're more focused on the legislative branch itself, the National Assembly, and it's these guys that will be elected on Sunday. The National Assembly of Bulgaria has 240 seats, and like many other European countries has more than two parties, so attaining a single party majority for the establishment of a government is a tad difficult. Remember, any Prime Minister has to have the confidence of at least half the House. In fact, the reason for this particular election, which is happening a full year earlier than scheduled, is because of lack of confidence in the Prime Minister, Boyko Borisov. He has since resigned, and upon Parliament not being able to agree on who his replacement will be, new elections. The political landscape of Bulgaria is relatively calm, but even here in the tucked away region of the EU next to the Black Sea, similar trends can be found as in the rest of the Western world. The dominant pro-European centre-right party is under pressure and is expected to lose seats. The mildly pro-Russian left coalition are expected to gain some seats, and as is the case everywhere else, it seems we have the potential rise in popularity of the nationalistic right-wing anti-European populist party, the United Patriots. It's another test for the establishment Europhiles. Now, to be realistic, Bulgaria is not in a place economically to cut itself out of the EU, and it's certainly not one of the pillar economies of the European Union. Bulgaria needs the EU far more than the EU needs Bulgaria. But the success or failure of the populace will be yet another test of public opinion, and as EU leaders are meeting over this weekend in Rome, undoubtedly to collectively give the middle finger to the UK, a show of approval in the Union, even from its poorest, furthest flung regions, would be a boost for morale. That's all from me, John. Now, you're claiming that there's hypocrisy in politics. You don't say.
Yes, could you imagine that? In other news, water is wet. We'll get to the hypocrisy in a minute, but first let's dive into the news. I wish I had some more uplifting stories out of the States this week, but nowadays it seems the only news is bad news. First, let's get to an update on the Republican replacement for the Affordable Care Act, the so-called American Health Care Act. The House was slated to vote on an updated version of the bill on Thursday, which aimed to soothe the fears of more far-right Republicans within the House, but it appears the vote will be delayed amid concerns that there are not enough votes for the bill to pass. You'll remember that the first version of the bill was functionally a tax reform bill that required insurance companies to cover pre-existing conditions, while basically giving massive tax breaks to the wealthy. The unlikely heroes in this scenario were the so-called Freedom Caucus, a far-right group of Republican senators that is essentially the brainchild of the Tea Party. There are roughly 36 members of this group, and they vigorously opposed the first iteration of the bill, calling the proposal Obamacare Light. Even with several changes made to the bill, including the removal of mandated coverage for minimum benefits, which would get rid of the Affordable Care Act's requirement of coverage for those with pre-existing conditions, the Freedom Caucus has still said they will not vote in favor of the bill. I guess in their minds, any government healthcare program is an entitlement program. Though this might seem like a good thing because the bill will not pass, liberals can hardly celebrate. It is likely that in order to get the bill to pass, Paul Ryan will steer even further to the right and gut the Affordable Care Act completely. If the bill can secure the support of the Freedom Caucus, there is actually a decent chance it would pass in the Senate as well, which we all agree would be a disaster. We will, of course, keep you updated on the progress of the bill when the vote is actually held. In other news, as a pertinent follow-up to our latest podcast episode, the confirmation hearings wrapped this week for President Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court, Neil Gorsuch. Though the hearings themselves were pretty uneventful, there were some fireworks afterwards when Senator Chuck Schumer said that Senate Democrats may filibuster Gorsuch's nomination. This is a dangerous game, in my opinion. If Senate Democrats were to filibuster Gorsuch, it's likely that Mitch McConnell would invoke the, quote, nuclear option, which would essentially mean changing the Senate rules so that only a bare majority would be needed to confirm a Supreme Court justice. This would effectively remove the filibuster as an option for Democrats, and Gorsuch would sail through confirmation. And actually, that's the least of their problems. The bigger problem with this strategy is that using up a filibuster option on an appointee like Gorsuch would open up the door to more extreme picks in the future. With the nuclear option in place, should, God forbid, Ruth Bader Ginsburg or another justice like her resign or pass away, Trump could appoint an even more extreme right-wing justice with little to no resistance. In my opinion, it would be a reckless and dangerous power play by someone who really has no power. It's a bluff that, when called, could yield disastrous results. And finally this week, and perhaps the most explosive story coming out of the United States, FBI Director James Comey testified before Congress that the Trump campaign is under active investigation related to Russian interference in the 2016 election. Although no specific details were offered, liberals everywhere latched onto this statement, feeling vindicated that their accusations against Trump have been confirmed. The right still seems to back Trump, however, with many viewing these revelations as inconsequential. They won, and liberals need to get over it. I can't get over it. I can't get over the hypocrisy. Tell me again, why was Hillary Clinton a bad candidate? Why didn't she deserve to win the presidency? No, don't get me wrong. I agree she was a terrible candidate and she didn't deserve the presidency. But what were the reasons that people voted for Trump? Hillary was corrupt. But Trump is perhaps the most corrupt president we have ever had, with conflicts of interest too numerous to count. Hillary was a puppet of corporate donors, yet Trump appoints his donors to high-profile positions in his administration. Hillary was bought by Goldman Sachs, yet Trump's Secretary of Treasury and top financial advisor are both former high-ranking Goldman Sachs employees. Hillary was guilty of graft and nepotism with the Clinton Foundation. Trump's son-in-law benefits from his policies, and Ivanka gets her own office in the White House. Hillary was out of touch with the average working American. Trump, a billionaire, has a budget and healthcare plan that hurts those exact same people who put him in power. Hillary was under active FBI investigation during the campaign. It turns out Trump was as well. We're just now finding that out, but remember when Marco Rubio said this about Hillary Clinton?
Just ask everybody this. Can this country afford to have a president under investigation by the FBI who could be involved? Think of the trauma that would do to this country.
Where is that rhetoric now? Republicans love WikiLeaks when they give us Hillary's emails, but despise it when their own secrets are revealed. Democrats love James Comey when he investigates Trump, but call for his resignation when he dares question their queen. The whole system is built on hypocrisy. Remember when Trump used to tweet all the time about Barack Obama golfing too much? Well, it turns out Trump has been golfing, I think it's 8 times in the 13 weeks he's been president. Remember the right-wing hysteria about Obama spending so much on lavish vacations? Well, Trump has spent more in his time as president than the Obamas have spent in a year, with his trips to Mar-a-Lago almost every weekend. Not even to mention, the budget alone for keeping Melania Trump and Barron Trump in Trump Tower in New York is enough to float Meals on Wheels for a year. We're paying about $1 million a day in security and other expenses to keep her there, when she should be living in the White House. Where is the right-wing outrage at this waste of taxpayer money? You're not going to find it. Don't get me wrong, I didn't want Hillary to be president. I didn't even vote for her. I'm not trying to excuse the left because Republicans are obviously horrendous, but we are guilty of it ourselves. Obama, the patron saint of neoliberalism, claimed he would have the most transparent administration ever. Instead, he used the Espionage Act more than any other president to prosecute whistleblowers. He won the Nobel Peace Prize, yet he expanded the drone program and dropped 12,000 bombs in 1 year alone. He opined about the importance of privacy, yet he authorized the largest expansion of NSA spying in the United States ever. He promised healthcare for all, but only tweaked regulations to give a massive payday to for-profit insurance companies. Really, what's the difference between the Democrats we have now and the Republicans? Now, I'm not going to sit here and claim an equivalence between the two. By far, the Republicans will vote overwhelmingly against the interest of the people. The Democrats, don't get me wrong, they'll do that too, but at least they throw us a bone every once in a while. The problem is that there are no principles. While they differ on social policy and some fiscal policy, ultimately the Republicans and Democrats are only two sides of the same corrupt, corporatist coin. They are each sold to their own class of donors, and they seek power to advance those interests. We effectively live in an oligarchy, where the tactics used by those in power are always okay when they are in power, and always egregious when they are not. The rulers are good by definition. They are not defined by goodness. There's no moral high ground. Why is our system so infused with hypocrisy? Because the only standard is to play for a team and not to strive for an ideal. Each party will vigorously oppose anything the other does, and then decry the others as obstructionist when it doesn't go their way. The problem is the rulers are not even aware of this. Just like a fish isn't aware it lives in water, the rot is so fundamental to the way of life in Washington that it hardly gets a second glance. The people see this, we see it, we know this. It's why we don't trust politicians. We know the only principle they stand for is personal aggrandizement and power. This is unsustainable, and the whole system needs a reformation. This is why people like Bernie Sanders were so popular. This is a lot of the reason why Trump was so popular. Think about that. Hillary Clinton and the rest of the Republican candidates were seen as less trustworthy and less authentic than Donald Trump. Donald Trump! How can anyone be seen as less trustworthy and authentic than Donald Trump? The theater of hypocrisy we have in the ruling class is so fragile that all it takes is an ounce of authenticity to start a movement. You can just pretend to be authentic and it starts a movement, like Donald Trump. We need real, true, authentic liberal leaders like Bernie Sanders for the people to rise up and bring the establishment to its knees, and we need it now. And actually, you can support a movement just like this. Justice Democrats is trying to groom and run non-corporatist, non-corporate money-funded candidates who will fight for a social democratic platform. I've put a link in the description of this episode to the Justice Democrats website. Look at it, and if it's something you're interested, donate. Because we need to get rid of this ruling class. They need to go. The establishment is no longer serving its purpose. They're serving corporations and special interests and not the people. And as long as that's the case, hypocrisy is inevitable. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you liked today's episode, don't forget to follow us on Twitter @CommonersPod. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube and iTunes. The music for today's episode is Drive by Otis McDonald. Please see the link in the description for the rest of his work.